you're just going to start a massive war and ruin any popular support we have. So don't do it. And Zarqawi's response was, I don't care. I'm not listening to you, right? And that's exactly the tactics that he pursued from that point on, which was doing everything he could to basically start a full sectarian war. And that was all happening from about 2004 on, after the US overthrew Saddam Hussein and was struggling to contain that whole insurgency.
Following up with Michael's question and pushing the bit more, like you said that it's like a war machine, but then all this bureaucratic apparatus, the like last voices series, which is Stefani's talk on anti-security deals, and there were really detailed forms, printed forms only for that purpose. So, like either we're talking of paper war machine with the bureaucratic apparatus, or how do you reconcile these two perspectives? On the one hand, state-like operation, on the other hand, this constant war foundation.
I think it has a lot of features of a state. I think I tried to show in the talk that it most definitely has a lot of features of a state, but that I don't think it can fully realize that. And because it's stuck in that in-between condition, this is why I look at it more in that way. But your point is well taken. I'll give some thoughts. Yes?
So from the outside, all of those edicts and restrictions sound horrible. But I'm wondering, what, if anything, have they offered as carrots over time to local folks? And what's motivated? Is it only fear that's motivated local folks to be involved, or?
That's a good question. So one of the, ISIS has really taken advantage of conditions that existed before it, especially a feeling among Sunnis that they were being marginalized under the Maliki government in Iraq, and that no one was really represented after Saddam Hussein had been overthrown. So you have Iran playing a really large role in Iraq. You have a new Shiite-dominated government with Nouri al-Maliki. You have the Kurdistan regional government. You have American forces, and they don't see any of these as representing them. And in the absence of another group, ISIS, a lot of Sunnis who weren't necessarily extremists in any sense, sought things like this, like salaries and consistent bread, basically. Stability, thank you, from ISIS when it came into their areas. And that I argue at least, they've done a lot to undermine that goodwill with excessive punishment and the hypocrisy people see in that foreign local split.
Kind of a twofold question for you. You talk about the dynamic that's happening between foreign soldiers coming in with their relatives and wives, it seems like. Do you have any idea of the demographics of how many people, or what's the percentage of population of people coming from where, what different countries, or in that, and maybe can you explain a little more how that affects that on the ground in the sense of
That's really hard to say. We have a fair idea about total numbers of jihadis, give or take, and that there's something like 120 countries represented. They're disproportionately from a handful of those countries. Tunisia, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and then Algeria, Morocco, France, UK. And then obviously there's a ton of others. Your question gets at a really interesting dynamic, and I'm not sure that we have good enough statistics about how many people have fled. We have numbers of refugees in different places, but especially IDPs, internally displaced people. It's not entirely clear how many people fled from which areas to which other areas. How many people even moved into ISIS areas as IDPs. We have estimates of these things, but I've never put them all together to kind of come up with a coherent answer to your question, alongside an estimate of how many people have come in, how many of those have died fighting, and how many of them were replaced. So it's a really interesting question. I can't say that it's potential. You can get an estimate of that. We haven't done it.
Thank you.
So.
Do you have a sense of the number of people currently living in like IS land? I just looked on my own, I've seen everything from 1 million to 10 million within the last, I guess, like 2 weeks ago, looking at various news sources. And I mean, maybe if you don't have a better idea than that, I just have a really bad sense of what the size of the population now is, whether they're actually losing population or not. But
So Mosul has a million people by itself.
Mhm.
So I would venture a guess that it's somewhere between 4 and 6, but I can't say that I've studied that.
As you mentioned, the state kind of is. It seems like they're exploring, some different sort of punishment systems as they go along. With those sort of like different experiments and changes in the way they govern, have they sort of changed the way they portray themselves in propaganda to their citizens, or has it been a relatively consistent message as to what the state shows itself as to its citizens?
That varies significantly. They're actually, kind of in a similar way to the way the different wilayas are all making policy, which is largely similar, but as we saw had variation. They have separate propaganda units for different languages. It is not merely a question of translating what they produce in English into other languages. So they have entire teams making French, making Turkish, making Russian, German, Arabic, and those people are very highly paid. Those are very prestigious positions apparently inside the state, and they reach a pretty high quality of propaganda in terms of its publication quality, how polished it is. As for the messages, so those vary in terms of the people they're trying to reach. I would say that they're mostly, the propaganda is largely directed outside. There isn't, the Arabic language one is certainly directed at Arabic speaking audiences, but pretty much all the rest are really geared at portraying the successes of the state and of ISIS and trying to get them to nuke more people to join. So I guess that kind of answers your question. I can't say that I've done a detailed enough study of their propaganda to say more in more detail how those messages are achieved, because I'm pretty sure they have.
Just wanted to talk about like what you're kind of saying, kind of like looks like me like a very classic case of state making in like wherever you go, like previous European state making, and even like one case I'm thinking about is the case of Taliban in Afghanistan.
Okay.
So is there a lot of, I mean, I don't know if you have done a lot of work on Afghanistan and the Taliban, I kind of feel like there are a lot of similarities in terms of this idea that they are kind of disconnected from the world, but then they're still kind of like making this state work. And the second question that I was wondering was if we don't focus a lot on that. So there was apparently some sympathy for the Taliban in Afghanistan because they were providing security, right?
Mm.
Is that the case in Iraq? Because previously I'm not sure if it was as non-security in Iraq, in Afghanistan as in Iraq, but is that also like sympathy towards ISIS because it's kind of providing these essential security that is like the most important?
Definitely. That's been a consistent thing that has come out from people who've left, saying that once ISIS actually took over, things stabilized. A different kind of top-down rule began to be imposed, but I mean they've been living through the chaos of the collapse of the Iraqi state, American forces trying to contain the insurgency. ISIS and in Syria, through the war there, similarly they were able to impose basic stability in many places. So in that sense, yes. As to the Taliban, I can't say that I know enough about that case to evaluate the comparison, but it's something to look at. Thank you.
Well, thank you once again. And,